Hello, I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, fractalu.com, and this is the second in the series of Intro to Geobiology. The first series we made in this was so popular, we talked about this church in South France, which had magical magnetic lines, but had been disastrously poisoned by placing a power transformer and circuit board controller right over the water vein water well crosspoint on the sacred property, and really the magnetic lines of the entire property were really very badly damaged. So we want to extend this intro lesson to geobiology today. Actually, we made a fun little film in Karnak I'm about to show you, talking about the sacred standing stones there and the magnetic lines. And this is a prequel to that little film clip. We just came back from the beautiful conference near Tours in France with Elena Denon and Jean Charles. And on our way back, we were in Carnac, and we did some fun little dousing magnetics at the sacred standing stones there. And to sort of give flavor to that conversation about geobiology, I wanted to just do a little bit of background. Today, I'm going to be featuring our longtime friend and partner, bioarchitects.net, Oldrich Hosman, Olda, from arc.cz. This is his website, and there's Olda. He's an amazing, he's really has the energy of Steiner, and he creates this amazing biologic architecture, really wonderful work. And so I wanted to give some examples of some work he's done. One particular example, which has always inspired me, is Olda was working there in South Bohemia, Czech Republic, and he really made a map of the magnetic lines of a town, a small town, actually Vlachovo Brezi in South Bohemia. The point here is that these live magnetic rivers, which are the life of the town, the fertility of the town, and really the lifeblood, he actually convinced the mayor there to implement the magnetic map of the town on the square. So now when the children walk over the magnetic lines, here's a blue magnetic line, a water vein, and here you can see the town square in this town, and the magnetic lines are actually mapped. So when the children walk over a magnetic line and they feel something, they see, oh, it's already in the tile work. It's color-coded, that the sacredness of the magnetic lines are actually etched and colored in the environment, so it's so easy to see your relationship with the living magnetism of the space. It's so important. So just a little more example of Olda's work. See, he's actually, this is where he's preparing a group of young people. They're designing a school for young people, and he takes the people to the site where the building is about to be built, and they do, the Steiner-esque kind of ritual to bond with and feel and attach to the land there, so that you're actually embedded in the magnetic lines of the space. They do mantra and songs, ritual of connection, and then you see they're doing a little sacred dance, and they light a flame, and they actually connect with the rocks. Notice that in the basement of the building, classic here, this is an example of a basement where the use of metal is avoided even in the basement. So you got bedrock and a rock layer, and no metal in that basement. So the magnetism is alive. They use a candle ritual, and Olda's work is wonderful. And then they actually make a clay living sculpture of the proposed building. You'll see later how this building looks. It's amazing. They actually, so they can feel it together. It's like a living process. And they model how the life force, the charge, is going to breathe into and out of the structure. It's wonderful work. And so they make a magnetic map of the planned building. You see where the charge is going to enter, and they relate that to the magnetic map of the land. This is such important work. And so here is his early drawing of the major ley lines that crossed that very important small town in South Bohemia. And so then that map they actually implemented in the geobiology of the space. I remember him talking about acclimating the local priest to understand that the geobiology is not the devil. No. It's actually the life force of the land. And finally about Olda, arc.cz, just a couple of examples of the sacred buildings that Olda works on. Here you see the geometry map is embedded to the plan for the chi flow for the charge of the site. He's talking about unfired bricks. Do you know that the bricks that are fired at lower temperature have a higher dielectric? They breathe charge better. It's such an important thing to keep the life force. So here's another one of his maps of a district near Motol in the Czech Republic, and then he magnetically maps the significance of what he calls the geoshifts, which we would call the fault lines, the cracks, and the relationship to the underground water. You know, if you sleep over underground water, your aura goes with it. It ain't good. So if you understand where the water veins are under the building, then you know you put the water vein under the wall. It's actually obvious why your aura would travel with the underground water, because your aura wants to go with it. It makes sense. So don't sleep over underground water vein. And the map of the geopathic stress, etc. So all these things give you a clue to the proper way to orient your living space with respect to the life force of the area. Here he's talking about the geoshifts, the fault, and the water again, and aligning the buildings so that people can make use of the energy of the water veins and faults, but not, for example, to sleep over them. So a holistic landscape map, use map, takes the buildings and fits them to the natural contours of the energy of the land. This is the work of Ulrich Hassmann, and it's beautiful work, and this was only a little taste and flavor. And then the other basic intro to geobiology here, we wanted to feature our website, goldenmean.info/geobiology, which is the background for much of our work on geobiology as it relates to our bioarchitects project, bioarchitects.net, where we list all of the bioarchitects we work with. It's amazing. Ulrich is there, and Olda, and many others. So here is one of our most advanced geobiologists, Stefan Cardino, who we work with for many years. The important thing is here, note this tool here. It's possible, but not easy, to measure the magnetic line strength in nanoteslas, but you have to move very slowly and carefully. And there are devices now which calibrate this, but it's true, the magnetic lines are actually measurable in nanoteslas. This is an important point. And then Stefan Cardino, along with Jan Lipnik here, are famous for modeling how this charge forms around the sacred buildings, in this case a cathedral, something called a telluric chimney, which we'll show you in just a moment, which actually looks like a hair follicle on the land. It's the equivalent of the microwave conductor that is a hair follicle. Amazing story. This is this is the base of the telluric chimney forming on this actually sacred space. This is a chapel. This is a church here. The point to be made here, you see he's talking about this, a Pei-Ray line here. There's what's called Hartmann Pei-Ray Curie lines, and Stefan did very advanced work showing which metal is most attracted to those lines, and also we'll see below the actual frequency which most deflects those lines. For example, a Pei-Ray line is most deflected by gold, and Pei-Ray line cross can actually save a beehive. This is an example that certain of the energy lines are very important for keeping life happy. And the thing is that Stefan Cardino had quite a Kundalini experience and actually sees these lines clairvoyantly. So you can see here how the stone dolmen act as a deflector and a bubble, and the major Hartmann Curie lines are bent around it. It's like a lens for the lines of charge. And here you see that these magnetic lines, actually here the water veins, actually disappear during, or actually the charge recedes during an eclipse. This also is a map of the effect, more accurate, this isn't the eclipse map. This is the map of the effect on the human aura when you walk over a water vein. It's very, very instructive to see that your aura actually wanders off with the water. And here's what I mentioned about a telluric chimney. This is what it actually looks like. This is from Stefan Cardino. So it's actually, it looks like it's a hair follicle on the land, but it's the size of it. of a church. It's huge. Yeah, here's what it looks like, a hair follicle on its side. So this is actually the Earth's magnetic bubble forming what is obviously a living body with the functional equivalent of hair. You know, human hair has a very important microwave function. And here's just a little more. This is the effect on the Hartmann and Curry lines of the eclipse. This is what I was speaking about before, that as much as 80% of the energy of that line is lost during an eclipse, specifically when the moon becomes between the Earth and the sun. And now we know the physics of why, because the moon, being hollow and metal and artificial, is a very bad or very low dielectric. So the longitudinal line of the sun that we know is the longitudinal wave that makes plants grow is messed with on the way to the Earth if the moon is directly in the way. Like during an eclipse is a good time to duck, and it's absolutely clear that if you want a seed to grow, you do need to avoid the moon. It's a very simple physics, because the moon actually interferes with that longitudinal coherence coming from the sun. And so here's some of his work on the netters. And Stephan Carnac has these amazing devices from the ancient Chinese techniques of geomancy, geobiology, that can actually zap a plasma parasite in the aura of a church or a person. All these wonderful examples. And working with the elemental forces and drawing them. And the children actually draw them, that Stephan Carnac does. And so this is all from the goldenmean.info/geobiology website. So, summary: the magnetic line, the rivers of magnetic current, are the fertility blood of the planet. It's where the magnetic flux is concentrated. For example, a magnetic line will jump a long way over to find a quartz vein. The quartz, and then when you make a spiral of the right kind of quartz, that's primary in the physics of rain making. goldenmean.info/rain, because these magnetic lines like the quartz so much. So there's so much to understanding the magnetic currents of the Earth. Obviously, by tuning and focusing them, the ancients literally controlled fertility, very much like they controlled the flow of water. They controlled the flow of magnetism to concentrate it and produce fertility and regeneration. And literally, the centripetal force of the magnetic lines dramatically triggers seed germination. I mean, this is basic. It's fundamental. And our culture has simply lost this knowledge. It's tragic. So, Basics 101 of geobiology is, if you cannot feel a magnetic line, probably, you cannot feel. It's some fundamental dowsing skill is essential to every human being. If you walk across a strong magnetic line and your hands are out by your side and relaxed, and you're walking very slowly across a strong magnetic line, you should definitely feel a tingle in your fingertips telling you something. And then you tune into that and you focus that skill, and eventually you're a dowser. And that means you're tuned to the magnetic lifeblood of the Earth. And if you can't feel that, I'm sorry, I think you're in trouble. Oops. And by the way, it's very true. The more you have access to some form of bliss process, the implosion in the DNA, the more you become sensitive to these things. So, of course, me, after 30 years of Kundalini, I can walk up to a field and pretty much know from a distance and point, where's the magnetic tower there? Somehow my intuition talks to me when I get around magnetic lines. It's fun, actually. I like it. So, anywho, we're emphasizing the importance of understanding the magnetic rivers of the Earth. That is the theme of our geobiology series. And now we're going to present the short film we made at Carnac. The mystery of Karnak here is that some of those stones had incredible shadows of magnetic hair stand up, wonderful. But most of the stones, sadly, the magnetic current was not, it was gone. It was imperceptible. The magnetic blood had stopped flowing. Oops. And we talked about that with the Druid on site there. And I'm sorry about the wind in this recording. But apparently, the story we were told was that when Carnac joined the UNESCO and they decided to put a big metal fence around the thing, oops, the magnetic rivers started dying right and left, and all the elementals left town. I mean, it wasn't good. It's simple dumbness. The actual thing that attracts tourists and makes money is magnetic life. And if you're trying to attract tourists and then put a metal fence around the damn thing, this is the height of stupidity. Let's educate the mayors. Do not put metal and electrosmog around the sacred site when you're trying to attract tourists and money and life force to a village, because, oops, you forgot what the sacred is. So this is the Storal to our Mori, and now we're going to present the geobiology film from Carnac. Here it comes. Hi everybody, I'm Dan Winter, as you know. This is Geobiology lesson number 2. We're here at one of the many powerful dolmen sites around Karnak in France. And there's a lesson to be told here. Actually, we just interviewed a man from a long line of a Druid family, and of course they were telling us great stories about the stones in Karnak. Actually, the magnetism here is focused beautifully, and I can feel so much charge coming from this stone. My hair standing up. It's fabulous. I'm feeling energized and tingling and really happy. But the story that needs to be told, and remember we're dedicated to education on this theme, is that as it was explained to us that Karnak, somewhere roughly around 2015, entered this UNESCO program for sacred sites. And it's understandable they needed to, in some way, commercialize. It's understandable. But unfortunately, their decision of the way to make it necessary to pay to come into the giant site of Karnak, and that's near here. This is not the main site, but this is, so what they told us basically is this site's still alive. However, the major Karnak ring, unfortunately, as part of commercializing, they put a massive wire fence around the whole ring of stones. And tragically, we are told, and this is the lesson we wish to teach, that all the local Druids know that the elementals and the nature spirits actually left the major ring at Karnak shortly after the major metal fence was installed all the way around. Because you understand that that metal has the absolute raw dielectric, and literally from in electrical engineering terms, the metal will, quote, kill the magnetic field. Well, actually, quench. And unfortunately, in the same way that a negative ion wind is medically proven to heal in a hospital, the side of the hospital facing the beach with a negative ion wind, it's well proven, the healing is faster. Well, the negative ion wind is the same as the living plasma from stones which are designed to function as a lens to concentrate the living plasma, just like the living plasma from Therify.net. Unfortunately, a giant metal fence is such a short circuit to that living plasma life force, killed or quenched, that all the elemental forces literally locally either have to die or leave, because living plasma cannot propagate through something that has the wrong dielectric, like steel or aluminum. So sadly, you know, governments go to all this trouble to attract tourists to sacred sites. It's understandable, it's appropriate, and people can be regenerated at a sacred site. I am standing here, and I am feeling wonderfully regenerated. My fingers are tingling, my hair's standing up. I'm a happy camper. And so people are willing to, you know, commercially, sacred sites are practical as well as sacred. But unfortunately, with governments not understanding the nature of what is sacred, which is where magnetism is able to compress, this is the lesson we are asking you to help us teach at university and government levels, that if you put a ring of steel and aluminum and metal fence around a sacred site, the magnetic lines are destroyed, and everything that's sacred about the site, which is the living plasma that inhabits the sacred cross points. So we're suggesting that this is our second in this series of geobiological lessons, coming from Carnac, France, and saying, help us teach the lesson that a sacred site is sacred if you understand the nature of living plasma. Thank you very much, and thank you, Valerie, for filming. Over and out for now. We're now in a slightly more remote stone ring at Carnac, and in this ring you can see that there's one very strong stone that still contains the life and the magnetism that was in the ring, but you can actually feel some kind of sadness from the stones that are no longer erect. And the thing about this site is that in that huge array of stones just over there we just filmed, there was only like one stone that was still really alive, and most of the array was really kind of, you didn't feel that wind of charge, that rejuvenation. So in fact the charge circulation has radically dissipated. One or two stones still alive, and even here we have one stone that's really strong and the rest. So that's the mystery here. You know, they took an Aboriginal who was singing that song line, and they put him in a car and drove along the song line faster than he would normally walk. And it started, he sang then like a 33 record being played at 78, actually. So but there's a specific sequence of sound frequencies which are associated with the magnetic line. And they call it song-line dreaming track. What they actually mean is part of the compression wave of the longitudinal array. It's literally a living magnetic worm or snake. For example, when our friend Auntie Lorraine from the Bunjalung tribe in Molalimbi died, the storm that went across that magnetic line went across the whole continent. And that magnetic line was a family pet for that family of shaman, actually. So they inhabited that magnetic line. Okay. And it's called a dreaming track. Now we know the physics, because what enables lucid dreaming is the ability to coherently inhabit the longitudinal compression of that magnetic line. We know the Earth grid magnetic nodes are placed like sacred sites, which are where compression is enabled at the nodes. Telepathy is enabled and nuclear critical mass is reduced. Sacred sites are very measurable. So, and that's where this longitudinal or compressional, sometimes called scalar wave, bounces at those nodes, exchanges inertia with transverse. That's how you contain heat at a distance. It's all action at a distance. It was basically longitudinal coherence, sometimes called gravity waves. Anywho, those are the places where, you know, Karnak and Kozyrev proved only there do you get military quality telepathy. That is DNA radio, those longitudinal nodes. So what the Aboriginals call songline dreaming track, now we know a lot about the electrical engineering. Okay. Precisely the electric field that we now can measure creating lucid dreams.
And can you do that artificially?
Well, to some extent, if you create what's called a phase conjugate pump wave, it looks like a caduceus based on Planck and Goulden ratio, which are the Schumann harmonics. If you induce that kind of compression, and they did it at universities, I think it was 29 and 43 hertz they used at university, which is very close to the equation, which is 30 and 50 about, that harmonic series, which enables compression, was proven at university to trigger lucid dreaming. And now my new equation predicts why, because we know what those frequencies are. They're an implosive compression series based on Planck and Goulden ratio, called plankfire.com, which enables implosion, therefore life. Physicists agree charge collapse causes consciousness. Physicists agree charge collapse causes gravity. Physicists agree they don't know what causes charge collapse. I answered that question, which therefore is the cause of gravity and consciousness, which is Planck times Goulden ratio, implosion of charge tuned to Planck. Universal musical key signature of every wave in physics, and at that tip of that pine cone, the transverse up and down waves are converted to orderly longitudinal compressional waves.
That was too fast, I'm sorry.
That's the array
okay.
nest, the fractal nest, literally, that enables DNA radio, quite literally. We have this model called Star Mother, Dodecacosa. If you look at that model, you see the Earth grid geometry, and that's also the sacred site geometry. Okay. And that's the place where lucid dreaming is enabled. Those are songline leverage points.
Okay.
So there's some practical implications, because if you want a lucid dream, now we know that a magnetic cross point will make it better. We know that sunrise and sunset will help, because as of the four-wave mixing. We know that equinox and solstice will help. All those things that enable that compression. If you start with lasers to conjugate, you need precise four-wave mixing. The sacred four directions, the ancients called it.
I use solstice to go, shamanic, not dreaming but traveling,
Yes.
and it's a powerful moment, of course.
Yeah, your hair stands up, and you feel a long wave.
And also, you get very precise information,
Yes,
and you can travel far and long,
exactly.
and
Your attention gets big.
yes,
Inhabits a long
Yes.
wave field.
having big dreams is the goal.
Exactly. In fact, a long wave is long memory, which defines ensoulment.
Okay. And would you say ancestors, is that why ancestors are very important to meet and call, because they inhabit this song's line?
Well, the Aboriginals were very clear. Their name for God is ancestor memory.
Okay.
And if you spend a day without talking to your ancestors, you haven't had a day, according to the Aboriginals. And it's the library of collective survival information.
Okay.
It's very compressed. So to get in there, successful death requires a small black hole, very good compression event. And for example, our plasma is known to help release ghosts because it offers the compression they need to get into the array. That's why it's called collective unconscious, communion of saints, Champs-Élysées, heaven, hey Ave.
And when you unite with people to release souls that are, for example, I went to my nephews recently, and in the morning I woke up with, I would say, ghosts sleeping on me, like cats or children, and I realized they were looking for something like love or warmth.
Well, they're looking for compression. It goes, essentially, if death is not successful, your memories don't compress implosively and cannot be distributed, allowed into heaven, so to speak. So, for example, if there's too much electrosmog, or if the death is disordered, then the compression is not
You
complete.
mean brutal, for example?
Exactly, yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, a successful death really should be very organized experience. A stone circle would be very good. A hospital usually not so good because there's too much electrosmog. But if death is successful, the death visions will be electrically contagious. Ray Moody proved that, actually. Surgeons proved that. And the reason death visions, a good death visions, are so contagious is because it's literally an implosive black hole. At death, you see the famous Heinrich Clouvet form constants lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, which is your DNA imploding, saying to get into distribution, you have to do compression perfectly. There's a name for that, it's called fractality. Basically, that's why that you would see your whole life pass before your eyes in a second before death, is you're practicing doing compression.
Okay.
In practice, you can prepare for that by every day you distill all the memories of the day into pure principle, eureka essence, and that is perfect
For
distribution.
example, keeping your journal.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So then all of that memory information is compressed into pure, essential survival information, and that is ancestor memory.
That's, you are answering a very important question for me, because I know the practice of writing my journal is important.
Oh, yeah.
But each time I was telling myself, what is important to write in it?
Yes.
And that's the answer.
Yeah, it's-
Very, very, very kind of you.
Well, it's literally essence. In other words, the part of your day that cannot inform ancestors 1,000 years from now probably isn't that helpful. But the pure information, the pure essence, the pure principle which you learn, which is called a perfectly shareable wave, that can go through compression.
Okay.
For example, at the moment of death, anger cannot be compressed. It isn't compressible. It's 1/7 as wave ratio. Whereas love, which is really perfect embedding, it's interesting that in physics, they say the definition of action at a distance is entanglement, which is actually the phase conjugate embedding, which names longitudinal array. So perfect entanglement is precisely what's needed to do compression well to survive that.
Okay. And what we did, I'm asking a further question about these ghosts. What we did is we united my nephew,
Oh, yes.
his girlfriend and I, and we asked what they needed, and they wanted to stay, but he said, I don't want anybody to be in my home. So I said, would you like to go
Yes.
to rejoin
He
the
delivered,
infinite?
yeah.
And they were very joyous, and they said yes, as if they never thought that possible. And we actually said, well, it's now, go, and they did in two I would say waves. That is, the boldest went first, and then I said, now nobody's staying behind, and then I saw the others,
Beautiful.
go. And do you mean that by the intention my nephew, his girlfriend, and I had, we somehow arrived to this compression?
Well, intention is critical and wonderful and important. Also, I would say literally what the intention did is concentrated the flame of your aura, which was their ladder to God.
Okay.
See, the flame that does not consume is compression perfected. We call it flameinmind.com. So when you set your pure intention, a perfectly shareable wave, that flame is lit, and that's implosive, and that's the geometry that allows compression to be calm acceleration at center, and that is deliverance into the array.
Okay.
The communion of saints. Yeah.
Where can I read all this? Because you tell me these things, but I know in 5 minutes they will go from my mind.
Well, I do have 5 books at Amazon.com, at fractalfield.com. You will see all those. And also the YouTube channel, Dan Winter Fractal Field, 350 films, 3 million views. And so we're a pretty shareable wave. We've been doing this for a while. But thank you for asking the pure intention questions.
Thank you for all.
Merci, merci.
Merci.